I've never been a part of a group who actually are so diverse and yet so united. People were looking forward to that Monday afternoon tonic, the Shield group.
We've also proven that shielders just aren't sitting at home watching Netflix, but we are doing something.
There's very much a stereotype at the moment about, heroes wearing masks, but actually not all heroes have to wear masks to make a difference.
I'm Mary-Kate McLennan, a Senior Improvement Advisor with Barts Health NHS Trust in London. We're a large acute trust with 5 sites and over 15,000 staff. When the COVID-19 lockdown was announced, over 600 Barts Health NHS staff were given notice to shield almost overnight. Barts Shielders is the initiative that responded to that need, and this is our story.
It didn't matter where you came from, what band you were in, we were all in it together. It was the saving hand, because it really was for some people.
The initiative involved collaborating with Alexis Palla, a research associate at Our Lab of Cardiff University. We are both part of a global community of liberating structure practitioners. We started using these techniques virtually and discovered that they were also powerful to connect people in that world.
Never have I ever been a part of anything where so many people have felt the same. Normally you're on your own with what you're feeling, but we moved together. We moved along together with the shielders, with the partners, with Barts, and we're on this journey. I think it's been amazing.
It has been amazing, and there's no doubt that shielding has changed all of our lives and brought into focus whatever the reason was that we were shielding. And that's the other thing, none of us knew particularly why the other was shielding. There was an acceptance, but what it did for each one of us is bring into focus our own stories of how we got to be shielders.
I randomly got a message from my ward manager as a staff nurse because I was shielding that I should join this call. I had no idea what the call was going to be about, but she was just concerned for my mental health. So it was like, why don't you join this call? It'll be a great way to connect in with some people from Barts Health. And yeah, it was. I mean, I'm a newly qualified nurse. I qualified in October. And so having to go into shielding at the end of February was very hard for me, only being qualified for a couple of months and finally feeling like I was starting to get used to me being a nurse in the ward and the responsibilities of that. So I joined the call not really knowing what I was joining. Yeah, it really helped me connect with Barts Health. I feel like I was doing something useful. I mean, I would be chatting to some of the colleagues who were on the front line and feeling incredibly guilty that I was having to shield, and I wanted and needed to kind of feel like I was helping and doing my part. I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. So I felt like being able to help other people really helped me and my mental health, and just being able to meet loads of different new people that I never would have thought I would have really met. I think as a nurse, when you work on a ward, you're kind of in your own little bubble, and you don't have the time to kind of understand the workings behind the National Health Service and Barts Health. And yeah, especially I'm like not the most extrovert, I'm quite an introverted person. So the way the sessions ran kind of forced me into chatting and having to be put into breakout rooms with people that I wouldn't necessarily talk to. I guess really helped bring out a good side to me that, I could actually feel like I felt safe and comfortable talking to these people. And even though I hadn't met any of you guys, it felt like you were all my friends. And it just felt nice that you all were we all know that the shielders are shielding because of something. Like, I never tell anyone about my disability usually because I don't want people to feel sorry for me or anything like that. It was really nice to be able to share, even though you don't have to share what your disability is. It just felt nice that you were in the community where you're all sharing something together, and you didn't feel like you had to need to tell people why you were sharing that experience.
What would life be like without the Barts Shielding group? I can't even imagine it now. When I first joined, I didn't know what I was letting myself in for. I didn't know anyone, but I was living on my own and shielding on my own. So only people who were in that situation could kind of understand. And so we made these amazing friendships and connections for life, because nobody else outside of shielders knows what it's like to have to not speak to anyone for 4 months other than over Zoom, which now we are pros at. But not only that, we were able to give people from outside the shielding group a kind of an understanding of what it was like, so that those who are vulnerable didn't get forgotten. Because I think a lot of us, talked about feeling not part of the pandemic, like we'd let everybody down, but actually we were able to support each other through by doing other stuff that may not have been patient facing, but actually helping our colleagues. So from the choir to the Facebook page to all of the wonderful things that we set up, we gave hope to those who didn't really have any in a horrible time. And I think going forward, other organizations can look at this and think people who are sick can offer so much more to the trusts that they work for, not just, oh, here, they're not there at work anymore.
Because I'm a mental health first aider, I talk with a lot of people in my trust, and I go across the trust to different things. So I met a lot of people, and I was getting a lot of calls at the beginning of the pandemic because I think I am this kind of like rescuer, and I'm always trying to sort out things for people. And when people come to talk to me about any issues, I'm always trying to kind of help them find a solution and see what is best to kind of sort out the situation. So a lot of people were calling me about feeling scared, and I used to work in the ITU, so I got a lot of calls from people in ITU. And I also have this guilt thing about being home, and yeah, a lot of my friends kind of out there. So yeah, I think having people that were in the same boat was kind of, I can't say positive because I don't think having to shield is positive in any way, shape, or form, but having people that were kind of going through the same made it a bit easier.
What's it like to work at Barts with having this space or without having this space? And I can't imagine not having this space now. I've been at Barts for over 20 years, and it's always been a big organisation. And I know COVID only was this year, but we've always been big, and we've always had colleagues on other sites that we didn't see. And so some of the issues that shielding brought up, it was just highlighted through COVID. But actually, this has been amazing. Like the support and the partnership, everyone was equal, whether you were Barts Health staff or you were from YLab or the Needs Workshop or you were behind the scenes, everyone was equal. It didn't matter. Everyone's opinion mattered. And that was really what was important, because everyone just shared and was honest and was truthful. And it was a safe space. And although we had the behaviours and you should respectfully listen and listen attentively and listen not to judge, it didn't really need to be repeated every time, because that didn't really happen. Like you go to some meetings or some groups and they have these rules and everyone ignores all the rules and you can see that there's judgment in the room. There was never any of that. It was always just very supportive. And the meetings that I always remember are the meetings where people got emotional because they were upset about something that was happening. And it was a fact that they could be. Is there a fact that they could come to this safe space and they could be that honest that they could be upset with us. And although it felt like, oh, we can't support them because we can't give them a hug or give them a tap on the shoulder or anything that you would normally do, it felt nice that at least we're a space that's safe enough that they could actually be honest with their own feelings and reflections, which is what I will always take forward.
So it could have been potentially a very dark time for us as shielders, but actually as that has grown something quite beautiful and very much has been nurtured by the people in the group. We've self-grown it with the help of our partners, like Alexis, like the people at Liberating Structures, the partners, the training, all of that has helped, and Dan and people. And then internally, other organisations with unions and occupational health and people have got involved. But that's because actually from that very first meeting, where it could have gone, people could have come and gone, oh, no, it feels too scary. Alexis made that feel safe. And because that felt safe, we all came back again. Because none of us knew each other. None of us knew what it was going to be like. We were all in those very early days of March when people were scared, shielding had just happened, people were having trouble getting food. Many of us had to get food parcels. But we came to this space and Alexis and Mary Kate made that feel safe for us. From that, it grew.
The lockdown notification affected thousands of Barts staff. In fact, anyone who wasn't doing direct patient care was sent home to work. I was aware of lots of evidence of the importance of social capital and emotional networks in terms of protecting against mental distress. And for NHS staff, our work identity is a core aspect of our being. I say that if you break me in half, I would have NHS through my centre just like a Blackpool stick of rock. Therefore, disconnection from our work family is a huge deal. At the very beginning of lockdown, I happened to be on a virtual call with the Liberating Structures community and was really struck by how amazing Alexis facilitated this virtual session and how connected I felt to a group of strangers, and I wanted that for Barts staff. We tried running a range of meetings with a few groups, but actually it was the Shielding staff that really responded amazingly well to this offer of connection. I have to be honest, the Bart Shield space wasn't always positive for me. It was quite difficult, and as somebody who was involved in trying to facilitate and shepherd the group, it was emergent, it was emotive, and it was constantly adapting. Liberating Structures gave us a sort of common language to be able to move through all of that uncertainty together and to create a sort of structure of security around all those difficult emotions. By the end of April, Alexis and I had formed a core group to support this emerging space, and a small number of Shielding staff volunteered and were trained up on Liberating Structures. This training was offered free through Happy, so we're eternally grateful for that. It also brought community members like Kate Pound and Dan Young and other Liberating Structures learning partners to support us on our learning journey. When creating the Shield space, which as I say we didn't intend to do, we focused on making sure that people who came to our call felt heard, seen and respected. We saw those conditions as the foundation of building meaningful relationships, growing capabilities in a safe space, and support people to problem solve and address their own challenges.
I first met the group, I was kind of like blown away by the stories and how touching. Everybody's got their own story. I didn't have to know what everybody's conditions were or anything like that. You didn't ask, you just listened to how they were feeling. This is an important group of staff that could have become a really big, the gap of inequalities could have become really big as they would have been marginalised even more. The gap of marginalisation could have been massive, but actually what's happened through this work is that they've got a voice and the people have been heard, and to me that's absolutely priceless. It's so important. Those with long-term health conditions or any form of disabilities could have just been forgotten about, and then we'd have a very different NHS if that became the business as normal. So, and I think that would be wrong. So I think this is really important because it's actually helped to prevent people being lost in the system or being forgotten about. But I think there's also about the actual skills of the group themselves and their willingness to get involved. And it was one thing that really struck me was everybody wanted to make a difference. Everybody wanted to support COVID. There was no ifs or buts.
I was so desperate to have something to do, to play my bit and to contribute to the trust, that I started joining different networks. And it was randomly through my connection with a network that I was supporting who then told me about this Shielding group. It was like a bomb, really. That's BALM, in case I'm not pronouncing that vowel properly. Or it could be BOMB as in the slang term. It was awesome, because this space really was awesome. It was a wonderful, safe place where people could really express their angst, their distress, their frustration about not being supported properly to be able to contribute, because we all have skills. Shielders have skills, whether you're clinical or non-clinical, we all have something of value to offer the trust. And, from listening to loads of other people's stories, we just weren't being mobilized in a way to be able to contribute to the trust.
And I didn't realise this until I'd been involved with the Shield for a while, but on paper you approach this kind of project or initiative as an external person trying to help, and obviously the labelling that's given to all of you in the Shield is it's a vulnerable group, and then you, after a while, you start to think, well, what does that labelling mean? What's the effect of doing that? Because you're sort of just making this distinction, which then it becomes almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. And it's almost like, and what I saw from the Shield Connect was not was not vulnerable people. I saw creative people who were finding strength, and they were finding through the way they were able to relate to each other in that scenario. They were providing this peer-to-peer support. We were doing things in that group that I could not have done in a corporate meeting. Like, people were willing to do things, people were willing to connect in ways that just don't come naturally to people who have this sort of drilled out of them in corporate settings and in most of the other places I work. So it wasn't in any way sort of a limited, like, there was a supporting role going on within the group, but didn't seem appropriate to say this is a vulnerable group of people.
We didn't volunteer to shield. We were put into that group, and for the majority of us, we've never sort of considered our own health conditions as a disability, because it doesn't necessarily affect our day-to-day life per se. We're able to function, we're able to hold on a job, a family life. Being put into shielding, being put into sort of a label and a group, it made us sort of started to internally reflect on the whole purpose of the shielding and what it means. And I suppose because COVID was new and unknown, there was the added fear of that. And then now you're worried about what your colleagues may or may not be thinking. And it's sometimes you've got your own personal demons dealing with, in terms of you're isolated. So for some of us, we were living on our own, or you suddenly found yourself within your family space more hours than normal. Then you having those sort of mental notes, as in, oh, I wonder what's been said. Or you may have attended a meeting and a slight comment like, I don't know, or for those of you who are working from home and relaxing, sometimes it's just those simple words that on a normal day you would have not even pay attention to it, but because we were put into that group, it suddenly had more resonance and power and made you think, oh my gosh, they must be thinking I'm skiving or I'm not working hard. And in actual fact, I found myself personally working more hours, because when the IT went and I couldn't connect, I would then be like, oh, I've got this piece of work to complete. So once I can reconnect, I would be working late into the evening just to make up the time.
So in the early days, we brought the shielders together once a week. The focus was really about staying in touch and getting peer support and developing the Shield as a replacement network for people's home teams. However, as the pandemic progressed and government advice changed on what we learned about the virus and health advice, people needed another sort of space about information about what the organisation was doing and help with some of their problems. So we had the peer support space on a Monday called Connect Call, and Next Steps on a Thursday, which gave organisational support and allowed the Shield to interact with different parts of the organisation and different teams that they needed support from.
When I first came on it, I was like, wow, this is different compared to everything else. I'm always in the background on all the other Zoom or meetings that we have. And you don't really get the opportunity to talk. Well, you can, I suppose, but there's so many other people that's bombarding that you just think, well, I don't even know where to start with any conversation with these meetings. So when I came on this for the first time, I'm like, I wasn't sure what I was going to see or how I was going to, if I'm going to accept it, if I liked it or anything. So when I came on and saw that, I thought, yeah, this is for me. I really liked it. I got engrossed. I actually spoke, which I thought I wasn't going to do because I'm a very quiet person. So for me to open up straight away, I even cried in one of my sessions, so hey, so that's me really opened up. So yeah, it's something I would encourage others to do, and I would love to keep it going. I would love to continue doing it.
The collaboration was a saving light and grace to shielders in the trust. It showed me that you could be vulnerable at any time. We became vulnerable, we were thrown into these uncharted waters, and we found respite, the shield space. It was a lifesaver. We had a shortfall in the beginning with supports. However, it never stopped us. The resilience was there. We kept going because the need was there. The shield space saw a need and it fed to that need. And that's what vocation is all about. When you get the call, irrespective of where you are, you just drop everything and go.
A lot of that vulnerability and the distress that I was seeing in the Shield Connect was because of communication issues or relationship issues with managers as a result of this train being set in motion with the shielding initiative. It's like, I'm now going to have to deal with this happening to me, and that's what I'm experiencing the stress of, rather than something that's about my condition. That's not bothering me at the moment. It's everything else that's external to me that's causing me stress.
I think the uncertainty of it all actually brought us closer together. So every day, every briefing, there was like, oh, lockdown is ending. So, oh, what might happen to shielders? And everyone was just sort of watching and seeing what might be said. And that kind of brought us closer together. Although I don't want to go back to that uncertainty. It was very frustrating, and it was every day you're like, really? But actually, I think it did bring us closer together. And it would be like, oh, the Friday, you'd hear there's going to be a press briefing today, and you'd be like, oh, maybe something will happen. And, and so it was hard for the trust and everyone to respond to that, because things were being announced on a Friday to be implemented on Monday. But the people that would have to enact that are often not working on a weekend, and then would have to work over the weekend to make things happen. But actually, that uncertainty, I think, brought us as shielders closer together, because we were all looking out for the information at the same time.
And that's also the value that we and the partners have brought to the trust, because by doing that, yes, it was over the weekend, but Facebook group was operating over the weekend. So we could surface issues to then get people on the Facebook group. So you got the Union and Knock Health on the Facebook group. So you can tag those people. And so, yes, things may not officially be starting for the Monday, but actually already people are gearing up or giving information, and people are feeling that there's somebody out there that at least has heard their concern. I suppose I don't know quite how we express that to the trust, but I think we've headed off a lot of what could have been quite nasty industrial tribunals at the past by very swift action and pulling in our partners into those conversations.
While we called on lots of expert advice and support from different parts of the trust, so for example, we had the head of infection prevention and control come and explain about new PPE policy, the most important partners that attended most regularly were the HR team, who were responsible for writing and drawing up the HR policy, and our trade union partners and our employee wellbeing, also known as occupational health service, who were really regular attenders and really key in that space. It was really interesting working with those partners who often find themselves on opposite sides of cases, and that actually in this space we really tried hard to collaborate, working closely together. There was a weekend where there'd been quite a significant change in government advice, and we had a next steps call, and I was quite anxious about going, but our head of HRD was really clear about the importance of showing up. She recognised that to design and to review the people policy, to make it really work well for shielders, she had to go there and listen to their experience. So the way that she led was really different in that space too.
When things changed, you knew that there would be lots and lots and lots of questions. I would get lots and lots of emails. So by preempting some of that, by putting information out there as it became, available, I suppose it was trying to head off some of those queries and also trying to alleviate some of those fears. Because if people sit with those fears and then it just manifestly gets worse. Whereas if you put something really quickly on Facebook that something has changed, or somebody puts up something like, this is happening, what do I do? It doesn't really take that long, answer those questions. I just think it's the inner instinct that, yes, it's pretty hellish at the minute and it's full on, but this can't last forever. And while I'm not shielding, I realize the anxiety of other people. And if you can do something to help alleviate that, I'm not entirely sure that's not a bad thing.
I was intrigued at first because I didn't think that there would be that many of us. And then when I joined, it was like, wow, there is so many of us that are all in the same situation. And I was amazed because we all go about our day jobs, no matter what they are, as the same as our colleagues. yet we was all put in the same situation and taken away from our colleagues for long periods of time. So I kept on coming because I was intrigued, and I kind of had two hats on, because I'm a shielder myself, but also from a Barts ability perspective, there was people that was in the group that kind of needed support, and it's the same with the support from EWS and from Unison and all things like that we've been able to get, and also from HR, is to actually listen and understand what people are going through and then provide support where you can. It was amazing. It's an amazing space that I found.
I think what was actually really amazing was the fact that Mary-Kate and Alexis made sure that every meeting went along with whatever was going on in the news. Anything that affected the shielders, it was okay, now this is happening, we need to discuss this, now this is happening, we need to discuss this, knowing what the shielders wanted. And also, which I thought was really good, is like at the end of every meeting, often we had breakout rooms with like Bartability, Union, HR, and people could choose which room they wanted to go in. I mean, when you want to speak to HR or the union, the chance of getting hold of anybody there and then is so difficult. But people could actually choose and go in and out as they please of rooms and get their questions answered. So rather than sitting there in anxiety thinking, oh my God, no one's listening to me, they've actually got first-hand information.
When the pandemic started, I'd only been in the trust for about 8 or 9 months. So I've got to meet lots of different people from across the trust and got to know them as people as well as who they are in their clinical or their non-clinical roles. What has been interesting with this group is that we've never met as a group in person because of the nature of the situation. Somehow, the way it's been facilitated, I think that helped and it made me feel quite comfortable. And I think you have to realise you don't have all the answers. The thing with the pandemic was everything was changing so quickly that we didn't have the answers. So I think you have to be able to say, I'll go away and I'll try and help you, but I may not know right now. So yeah, sometimes I felt a bit anxious at the start. There were tense periods. I think the most difficult was coming up to August, kind of expected to come back to work, etc. And it was all very unclear and I don't think they felt being listened to. So it was sometimes hard to know how to respond to that.
I think one of the most important things that I personally felt across different spaces was that people were not prepared to say, I don't know, even though this was a very new situation and it's a pandemic and no one's supposed to have all the answers, but sometimes it's difficult to say you don't have the answers. And I'm always very grateful when people are real and say, well, I don't know right now. And, I'll have to come back to you on this later, or I just don't know, just the simplicity in that can be very empowering as well.
But at a time when the underlying psychological need is to belong and to feel safe and to have meaning and structure, of course, the most relevant intervention, the thing that will make a difference, is to provide a group where belonging and safety can emerge. Doesn't mean it's not a bumpy way to get to. As a psychologist, I've spent loads of time in groups as a member, but also facilitating them. And one of the things that stood out is just the challenge, actually, of joining a group. It's hard. It's a hard thing to do. I think a lot of effort and thought has been put into trying to make it like the softest landing possible, but there's still always a bit of a bump. And I'm also just really moved by, how strong we can identify with seeing our work desktop, right? Because it means something. It means that we're going to be, maybe it might mean that we're going to be productive, but we're also connected to a group that we've belonged to. A team is a real thing, despite how hard it is to form these teams in the modern NHS, where there's so much demand on our time. And that idea that through that technology, one can plug back into that meaning and that belonging.
When I first started shielding, I used my own laptop, which made it easier. Setting myself up, that challenge was just a hurdle, which I really embraced because it gave me something to think about, and it was complex for a few days. And then once I achieved it, I was sort of ecstatic. So I think because of being at home, you look for tiny things that make you feel really happy, but it was also connecting me back to work. I could see my desktop remotely and it made me feel part of the workspace again. I don't even know why I'm getting so emotional, but I think being a shielder is more complex than people appreciate most of the time, and your emotions are up and down. But I think being part of this group, the shielding group, and just being able to check in with your buddies, because we've got the WhatsApp groups and things like that going, has really been helpful, because you know your rights, you know what you can say and what's reasonable to request. And I'm saying that even as a union member.
I obviously did 6 months working at home entirely, and then eventually had to make the move to working back on site. And it wasn't until I started a sort of 50-50 mix of working back on site that then suddenly I really, really struggled, had really bad anxiety, panic attacks, really, really suffered. And this group on a Monday and on a Thursday, with the information, was a real support to see that other people had their own struggles. I wasn't alone. I had to deal with my anxiety on my own, but it almost came, the second lockdown almost came as a big relief to me. Was very odd, but then I knew that I still had this for me, and that was really comforting.
Connection, support and belonging are themes that are obvious in all the testimonies that you hear, but working across the groups, there are other factors that are important. For example, digital skills and digital inequality is something that we noticed across all the groups. Not just the fact that NHS staff are much more likely to be working face-to-face with patients and less likely to have technological skills themselves, but also access to ICT equipment was really important. And that also was influenced by the band and grade of staff. So more senior staff were much more likely to be able to have personal computers that they could access or be able to resolve any supply problems themselves. The other factor that became obvious to us was the influence of presenteeism, this idea that to do work you had to be in the hospital building, and lots of shielders reported having to provide evidence to managers about shielding, but also created the question about how do we reimagine our services in the future if only people who are physically in the building are considered to work.
I think it just gave me the courage of my convictions in a way. Group gave me the courage to go, the questions I'm asking are actually okay to ask those questions. And if the answers you get back don't seem right or don't seem appropriate, then do I accept that answer, or do I think about ways to get the right solution? And that's kind of related to COVID really, and distancing, and changing hot desking, making sure people aren't sharing visors, making sure people aren't, they've got wipes to wipe down their computer. It helps the department and not just oneself. It's actually something that has, I think, because of the shielding group or the support group, it has meant that it is up the level of support within the department as well.
I mean, I came to the shielding group by invitation. Mary Kate invited me along. She understood that my position has always been that the unions aren't about sitting across the table from management and shouting the odds. It's about getting alongside people, trying to understand where they are, what their issues are, what their problems are, what their challenges are, and then trying to work through a way and come up with something that works for everybody as best you can. And that's not always easy. What surprised me when I did arrive was just how willing people were to share their challenges. I came to hear those concerns in the hope that I might be able to make a contribution and in some way help somebody. And I kept coming back because of those stories. I kept coming back because I started to be invested in the individuals that came to this group and their personal circumstances. And working in partnership with Gary and with Dee and with managers, you know, we were able to make a difference, and we were able to help managers move away from being task oriented. You know, they've got a service to deliver and that worries them, and they don't know how they're going to do that if they haven't got the staff. And I'd like to think that together, working in partnership, were able to get them to connect with the person that was in front of them, to actually bring the humility and humanity into that situation, and really to get in touch with our values. You know, we've got a superb set of values at the Trust in We Care, and I think we've moved on a stage with that. We're now looking at We Belong. So we are looking at ways of transforming ourselves as a trust and treating others as we would really want to be treated. And I think this group has done tremendous work in terms of bringing that partnership working forward and providing opportunities for us to meet with people that, it's been said before, that we wouldn't otherwise have met with. People, we'd have conversations with people we wouldn't have had conversations with before. And I think that interconnectivity right across the trust makes us a much, much better place, and it puts us in a much better position to work together more effectively.
How is it that our wider health system, and I don't think this is just our organisation, but how is it that our wider health system has lost sight of somehow the people that make the service be a service?
The most valuable thing in the NHS is our people. We could have actually utilised the shielding communities actually greater across the whole of the country. Kind of like makes me a little bit sad.
The really good thing about having partners come in from outside of our organisation and outside of the NHS, such as Liberating Structures partners and Cardiff University and people like that, is that it gives you a different perspective. I think when we're in the NHS, we become very tunnel vision, and having partners come in from different organisations gives us a new structure and a new way of viewing. And they don't know who we are, and we didn't know who each other were. So when we came very much as individuals, not as I'm Claire and I'm a therapist, I'm so-and-so and I'm a nurse or I'm a matron. We were all very equal, and we were all connecting on that level, and that felt really important.
Group gave back, and we've said it in various ways, empowerment, because I felt empowered early on to go out cycling and take my chances, and I felt empowered to open a window when I was at home. I don't think I would have had that courage if it wasn't for this group. I felt really empowered and lifted because there was strength. What I heard in everybody's story, no matter how beleaguered they felt, there was strength. They didn't realise their courage, but there was strength.
I just can't tell you how I would have been incapable of managing a Facebook group, but actually how key it's been to connecting people in. And that was, you know what, that was Claire and George. George, with her newsletter that Frizana's now picked up, where we noticed that actually people weren't answering emails because they were so anxious about getting emails from work. And that's where that newsletter that never talks about work comes from. You know, it was about keeping people connected, that they knew that they could open that email. There's no way that Trust would have thought this up. This is what you all thought up, and this is what you resourced, and this is what you brought to it. And also just paying attention to the phone-ins. The phone-ins really surprised me. It told me how much people really valued it when they can't see you and they can't speak, but they'll sit on the phone for an hour and a half, because actually what's coming down the line to them is so important. And I think what I would talk about in terms of the sort of wider work that we've done with the shielding community is we've created these two places where people can come together, but we've also harnessed shielding staff to do tasks. So I think that's been amazing, that we haven't just been responsive, but we've been looking at the co-creation that Liberating Structures and the Y Lab has helped us do, has made us understand that it's not a one-way thing about how we engage as organisational leaders or representatives. So that's been amazing, because actually it's become much more two-way, and we can see their skills and their strengths and really try to harness that. And I think they've really encouraged me to be courageous, to jump into technology, and also to, you know, really try new things that I might not have done I would not have done if I hadn't had the support. It's really clear. So that's what I would say has been really amazing about their support.
Probably one of the strongest words that comes out is sort of like a sense of community. The fact that people coming together and it recognised the need for that. And it wasn't something that was led from a hierarchy. It was something that was led equally across the staff groups. The people that got involved, there was never a sense of power or anything like that. And I think that really emphasises the word for me of partnership, in the fact it was done with, it's not done to, and it's done together. So there was a real sense that they owned it, and it was a very much a human-centred focus.
It's been very nourishing. It's been wonderful to hear other people and their stories, and to be part of a community, because I did feel quite isolated and I was missing people from work quite a lot. And this space enabled me to create that community, and I would often linger at the end because I was reluctant to go, whenever our sessions ended.
Part of what I'm reflecting on is it's been a very fast changing situation, and that brings up a lot of strong feelings because it's difficult to navigate it. And I feel like through the facilitators from Kate and Dan and Alexis, there's been some sort of hand, a steady hand, holding our hand or on the rudder. You can choose your image, but I think without that, I think I probably would have wanted to pull back into things that were a bit more familiar and probably not as effective.
We've worked in a different, more collegiate way than when we've had probably more robust and sometimes not always constructive discussions about the content of the policy. And I think in the space that we've had with Alexis, it's been a different feel. I think we've come at it from a common purpose. And I think we've all been able to see that what we have is staff who are quite vulnerable, feeling at times unsupported, and we've been able to work together to put in place, hopefully, some support and some answers to their issues, whether it's pay, whether it's support, etc.
I was there to be a voice of the staff and to speak up for them where they didn't feel empowered to do that for themselves. And for me, one of the biggest pleasures have been seeing people grow in confidence, that actually, you start off by perhaps speaking up on their behalf, that advocacy side of things, but eventually they feel empowered and strengthened enough to speak up for themselves. And I think that's really important too, because I think if we empower our staff to speak up, they start to solve their own issues. So this idea of solving problems before they become real issues is part and process of what we do. It's part of our DNA. And again, I think this group has been so important in promoting that within the trust. So thanks very much to Alexis and to Mary Kate and to the whole team. Because it's not individuals, everybody plays their part, but together we are much stronger and more effective than our individual parts.
Everybody brought something. I don't think we all realised what we brought, but somebody else got the benefit. We came in thinking, I need to get onto this call today, or we'd log in, but somebody else was looking forward to seeing our face. If someone was missing from the group, we missed them. It was like, oh. And we may not have said it out loud, but we all knew names that we were looking, oh, that person hasn't logged on, why they haven't? And we're just concerned, is that person all right? So yeah, that belonging, that care, we were allowed to care again, I think. Because when you're a shielder, it's like, it's all about you. Everybody's worried about you, but all of a sudden in the group, I can care about somebody else again, even though it's remotely. I remember the amount of virtual hugs we gave each other.
I can't really think of another way that I would have perhaps dealt with this. I think opening up to a manager or a peer or a junior at work is not particularly right. And in this group, it doesn't matter what grade, position, job everybody is. Everybody's going through something which is really quite difficult and has actually thrown us all a little bit of a curveball, and we've all had to deal with it. But we've dealt with it with each other.
Because of this work and this group and the network that you've created, has actually all become greater at change. You've created a network with all these people you didn't know, and we know those that have the most effective ability to lead change are those with the greatest networks.
And I've used bits and pieces from Liberating Structures and conversation cafe and random pieces, and I haven't done the full training, so it's basically what I remember. But I've used it in team meetings because there's something that can be used in anything in this virtual platform to make people open up. But actually, I'm not sure before how opening up people were in face-to-face meetings. So you'd go through your agenda and do the business stuff, but how much time was spent on reflecting and how did people feel? And COVID has done that a lot for people looking at mental well-being. But actually, how much should we actually listen to that bit? And I think that's something that I definitely want to take forward and spread amongst other people.
One of the most amazing things we did was to show people it's safe to go to hospital appointments, that it's safe to come back to work if that's safe for you. And we've worked so hard to try and alleviate some of the stress, because we can't make it right and we can't make it 1,000% safe, but we can all use our knowledge. But I was lucky, depends on what way you look at it, to have to go into hospital, but at least I was able to tell the shielding group, well, actually, it's quite okay. This is what you do. I think we've taught everyone, including patients, some really good stuff.
What the Shielders have done as a group, we've actually shown the organization that we can do things differently and with really positive outcomes. And when it comes to the equity aspect of it, it's not just Shielders that can be offered remote working in the future. That can be something that can be embedded within the department's working week. It's not just, only Jane gets to do it because she's clinically extremely vulnerable. It's something that can be offered to everyone. I suppose we've provided the evidence and the tools to say, actually, maybe this is something that we can look at in the future.